And we're back with another episode of Ask the Edmonds Cop. I'm Teresa Whipple here with Sergeant Hawley. We are going to address a topic that I think gets a fair amount of questions when incidents occur, and that is, how do police make judgment calls about what information they release or don't release to the public, to the media, when incidents occur? Because I know that we get comments on our website all the time about
yes, we see them.
Why don't we know about this and why don't we know about that, and kind of the minutia of the case. So tell me why that is, kind of what thought process the police goes through when you're investigating cases and information that gets released and doesn't.
Yeah. So we want everybody to understand where we come from first and foremost, and that is public safety is our number one priority. That's our job. So it's important to us that we release timely information, especially when it affects public safety as a whole.
Right.
Okay, and that's a key component. We're talking about the community as a whole. A lot of times we have events that may affect one particular person or one particular family, whatever the case may be. And I understand that people want to understand what's going on so that they can kind of comprehend it and say, okay, that doesn't necessarily affect everybody, but we want to get information out as quickly as possible for community safety type threats.
Yeah.
That's our number one thing. We get a lot of questions about, well, what was the person's name? Why aren't you releasing the person's name? That sort of stuff. As far as names go, people have a right to privacy in certain situations, especially victims and juveniles. So we don't release names of victims or juveniles unless the family gives consent or so forth. Suspects, this is where we really get a lot of questions. Well, why aren't you telling us what his name is or her name? Okay. That doesn't happen until people are formally charged.
Right.
Okay. And I think this is a big misconception with the public. I know I hear it all the time. We'd go to calls and say, I'm filing charges on so-and-so. Well, I can't technically even file charges on somebody. That's done by the prosecutor.
Yeah.
Okay. Even though we booked someone into jail for a crime, they haven't necessarily been formally charged.
Right.
That's a legal process that's done by the prosecutor.
Right.
And until that's done, we don't release their name.
Right.
Okay. So that's why you'll see in press releases and information I know that you put out. And when you call me about stuff, I always tell you it's, we release age, the gender of the person, and the city of residency. And that's about as specific as we get on that.
Right.
So.
Right. Yeah, and I think we try to follow that in the publications that I run with not naming suspects until they're formally charged. There's always exceptions to that, like sometimes situations just blow up and names get out by other media outlets, and by that point there's no reason to keep it secret because it's already there or for whatever reason. But the point is that I think you're right, there is that misperception, and I think the new prosecuting attorney, Adam Cornell, actually made a presentation to the city council recently, and he actually addressed that very issue. He said, why people wonder why there's a percentage of cases, and I don't remember what it was, but that do not ever go further than the charging, not the charging documents, but probable cause documents that the police submit, because they have to weigh the evidence and decide whether it can really be a case that they can present and get a conviction, right?
And we're not actually allowed to release what's considered non-conviction data.
Yeah.
So just because they've been charged doesn't that doesn't mean that information's publicly available. And I get it. The information is oftentimes out there. I hear this. It's already been put on social media, and people ask for us to confirm it, but we're not.
It's not your job.
And if the information gets out there, it's not coming from us.
Right.
The one caveat is if we have somebody who may not be in custody, but they are a significant risk to the safety of the community, then that's a different matter.
Right.
So.
Yeah, and I think that we see that quite a bit. You're looking for somebody, you need to get the name and photo out there, or you make that judgment. And I'm sure that must play into your decision making, right? Because sometimes you have to release information because it is a public safety issue, and you're always making that kind of judgment call, I'm sure.
Correct. Yeah. And the other thing with names would be if somebody already has a warrant for their arrest. That's a public record that's publicly available. So release of the name of somebody with a warrant for their arrest, that's fine.
Okay.
That works just fine. The next question we typically get a lot relates to specific investigative information.
Okay.
And we see these all the time. And they generally come in the form of what's going on with the investigation, what's being done, do you have so-and-so in custody, where there's a lot of questioning along that line. And so we don't release specific information on active investigations as they go along. Typically, you'll see a statement from us and it'll say something along the lines of, our detective unit is presently investigating, or this is an open active investigation, or detective unit is looking into it, whatever the case may be. And we want everybody to recognize why that happens, because there's a lot of specific reasons that's done that way. First of all, if you were to request a case report of an active investigation, state law exempts it from being released.
Okay.
Okay, and here's why. It's not that we don't want people to know what we're doing, there really aren't a ton of trade secrets as far as that goes, but we don't want the information getting back to the suspect.
Right.
So if you think about it, if you're able to watch the news and see what's going on, so is the suspect. Okay,
Yeah.
and we want to keep that stuff hidden as to where we're at with an investigation, what we're doing, all that sort of stuff, because we don't want them to know maybe that we're onto them, we know where they're at, who we're talking to as far as victims or witnesses, what information we have. That's important that we kind of keep that closely guarded,
Yeah.
because that can jeopardize our investigation and we may not be able to catch someone because of that.
Okay,
So,
that makes sense.
Yep. The other thing is, as far as specific details of the crime, we get a lot of questions. How many shots were fired? What type of handgun was used? What evidence have you collected? A lot of questions along those lines. We keep those also guarded. Those will come out after the case is over. So once they've been formally charged, now all these documents go into court and they're basically public record at
Right.
that point in time, and during trial, you get all of that sort of stuff. That's why you see more in-depth articles after
Yep.
somebody's been charged, because
Because you
have access
request
to
the
it.
documents
Yep.
and then we write up the story and
Yep,
that's how that works.
correct.
Yeah.
Okay. But during the investigation, we hold a lot of those specific details back for one main reason. We don't want it out there because when we find the person and bring them in for an interview, we need to verify that they know details of the crime that only somebody who was there would know.
Right.
And this became apparent, and you saw this a lot if you go back a ways to the Green River Killer case. That case stretched for many, many years. And you might be surprised to learn a lot of people came forward and confessed to being the Green River Killer.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of people.
I think I remember that.
Yeah. And that happens, especially in very public investigations, some of these sorts of crimes. And we need to be able to hold back that information so that they could confess to information that only the person that committed the crime would know.
Sure.
Otherwise, how do we verify that information?
Yeah.
So that's one of the main things as far as that goes.
Okay. And just coming full circle on this, in a very recent case, I think that people were concerned about, was the recent incident of the caller to some local daycares in Edmonds who was making very serious threats, and police were following up on that,
Yep.
and you determined that it was something that you believe the person was not in state, and
Correct.
you determined there wasn't a threat
Correct.
physical threat to the locations. But I think a lot of people were still, well, how did you determine that?
Yeah,
and why,
correct.
how do you know? And,
Correct.
because it's people, especially when it's daycares and
Yeah.
small children, people are fairly
Oh, yeah.
concerned.
Oh, we
So,
yep, totally get it.
I'm sure that must be a challenge for you, because you're kind of saying to the public, trust us.
Yes.
We're really doing our job. It's just
Yeah.
that we cannot go public with all we know.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah, and that falls along the same lines. The more that gets out there, don't think that the suspect isn't also watching that same sort of
Yeah.
stuff, and it's like, oh well, now they're onto me. They figured out this is how, and then they can start shutting stuff down, destroying evidence,
Right.
a whole bunch of other stuff. So we don't want them knowing how exactly we're onto them and what we're doing to catch them.
Right.
Is really what it comes down to.
Right.
So, and I get it. It's kind of the trust us, but we are hoping that you do trust us. I mean, I think we've proven in the past that we've done some good large-scale investigations, and I think we have a pretty good track record for catching the bad guy and putting him in jail.
Right.
You know, really, your safety is our number one concern. If it is a public safety concern as far as that goes, the information will go out.
Right.
The other stuff related to how we're necessarily going about getting them, that isn't in and of itself a public safety piece of information. You know, like if we were to come out and say, well, we're writing search warrants. Well, that doesn't necessarily affect the safety
Yeah.
of the public. We're doing our job.
Yeah.
And we work real hard at these things, you know. So your safety is our number one priority.
Okay, good. Thanks very much.
Yeah, no problem.
We'll be back soon with another episode of Ask the Edmonds Cop.